3 weeks ago, I stood at my own kitchen sink and could not remember whether I had already taken my morning pills or not. My hands were shaking. My daughter-in-law watched me from the doorway with a soft, patient look on her face, and she said, in the gentlest voice you ever heard, "Pop, maybe it's time we talk to somebody about all this forgetting." And I nodded, and I said maybe so. What she did not know was that there was nothing wrong with my memory at all. What she did not know was that I had spent 41 years behind a pharmacy counter, and I had finally, that very morning, figured out exactly what she was putting in my food. My name is Nolan Prewitt. I am 73 years old, and for the better part of my working life, I was the druggist on the courthouse square in Millbrook, Kentucky. If you grew up in a town like mine, you know the fellow I mean. The one who filled your grandmother's heart pills and your baby's ear infection medicine, who stayed open late on Christmas Eve because somebody's fever would not wait. That was me for 41 years. I know what pills do. I know what they do when you take the right one, and I know what they do when somebody slips you the wrong one on purpose. Before I take you any further into this, let me ask you something, because I have a feeling about who tends to find these stories late at night. Tell me the one thing in your kitchen that is older than you would ever admit to a stranger. The percolator with the cracked handle. The cast iron skillet your mother swore by, the wall clock that has run 4 minutes fast since Nixon was president. Put it in the comments. I would truly love to know what has been keeping you company all these years, because I am about to tell you about mine. And I owe you one honest word before we start. This is a story, and I have changed the names and softened a few edges the way you do when real people are still walking around out there. But the bones of it are true to life, and the warning folded inside it is as real as the chair you are sitting in. If you have somebody older than you in your life, or if you are the older one now, this one is for you. Stay with me. Let me take you back to the first Tuesday in September, before I knew anything. I lost my wife Vivian 14 months ago. Her heart, in the end, though that woman had more heart than anybody I ever met, so it always seemed like a cruel joke to me that it was her heart that quit. She taught music at the grade school for 30 years and played the organ at First Christian for longer than that. There are people in this county who cannot hear the first 4 notes of a hymn without hearing Vivian's hands underneath them. Our house still smells faintly of her, I think, though my son says that is just me being sentimental. Our son. That is a whole story on its own, and you need it to understand the rest. Vivian and I had one boy, Daniel. We lost him too, in a wreck out on the Bardstown Road when he was 31, and his wife had run off 2 years before that, so when the dust settled, it was Vivian and me raising his 2 children. Kyle was 9. His little sister June was 6. We raised them from that day as our own. I coached Kyle's ball team. Vivian taught June the piano. I walked June down the aisle. So when I call Kyle my grandson, understand that in every way that counts, I raised that boy as a son, and there is not a morning I do not thank God I got the chance to. Now, I have told you I know what pills do, and I want you to believe me on that before we go on, because the whole story turns on it. Let me tell you about a Tuesday afternoon a long time ago. A woman came into my store, a school teacher, sweet as they come, and she set 2 prescriptions on my counter from 2 different doctors in 2 different towns, and neither doctor knew about the other. And I looked at those 2 little slips of paper, and I felt the hair go up on my arms, because taken together those 2 medicines could have stopped that woman's heart in her sleep. She had no idea. Her doctors had no idea. The only reason she is alive today, a grandmother now herself, is that a druggist read the whole picture instead of just filling the order in front of him. That is the job. That is the whole job. Anybody can count pills into a bottle. What they paid me for 41 years, was to notice when the numbers did not add up to a living person. I tell you that so you will understand what happened this fall was not luck, and it was not some sudden brilliance. It was the oldest reflex I have. When a body shows you a symptom, you do not panic and you do not ignore it. You ask the one question nobody around me was asking. Not, is he getting old? But what could make him read this way? I asked it about strangers across a counter for 4 decades. I just never once expected to have to ask it about myself standing in my own socks in my own kitchen. June lives up in Lexington now. First-year school teacher, 3rd grade, and she is the spitting image of her grandmother when she laughs. Kyle stayed close to home, married a girl named Danny about 4 years back, and after Vivian passed, it was Kyle and Danny who stepped in to help me, and Lord, I was grateful. A widower rattling around a paid-off house does not always know how empty the days are going to get until they get there. Danny started coming by with supper. Kyle handled the yard, the gutters, the truck. They took over talking to my doctor, my bank, all the little errands that pile up. I let them. That is the part I have had to make my peace with. I handed them the keys to my whole life, and I did it gladly, because that is what you do for the people you love. Now, I have always been a man who writes things down. 41 years of balancing a cash register at close of business will do that to you. I keep a daybook, not a fancy one. A black cloth-bound ledger, the same kind I used at the store, and every night before bed I write down what I spent and what I have on hand, down to the dollar. Old habit. Vivian used to tease me about it. She said I would count the pennies on my own eyelids. And it was the daybook that first told me something was wrong. Not my heart, not a feeling, just the numbers, sitting there being honest the way numbers are. I keep cash in a coffee tin on the shelf over the stove. Grocery money, church money, the 20 I slip June when she visits. And one evening, the first week of September, I sat down to square the book, and the tin was $40 light. I figured I had miscounted. I am 73, not a fool, but I am 73, so I let it go. But the next week it was light again, 60 this time. And the week after that, another 50, small amounts, the kind of amounts a careful person takes when a careless person is supposed to be losing track. Except I was not losing track. My book had the true number in it every single time. I did not want to believe what the book was telling me. You do not want to believe it about your own kitchen. So I told myself a story, the way we all do. I told myself I was tired, that grief makes you sloppy, that I had probably spent it and forgotten. And right about then, as though something had been waiting for its cue, the forgetting started in earnest. The dizziness came first. I would stand up from my chair and the room would tilt, and I would have to catch the counter and wait for the floor to come back. Then the tiredness, a thick gray tiredness no night of sleep could touch. Some afternoons I would sit down after lunch meaning to read the paper and wake up 2 hours later with the light gone soft and orange and no memory of closing my eyes. And the fog. That is the only word I have for it. A morning here and there where my own kitchen felt one step removed from me, where I would open the refrigerator and stand there not sure what I had come for. And every one of those days, Danny was so kind about it. That is the part that still turns my stomach. She would find me foggy at the table, and she would put her cool hand on my shoulder and say, "You just rest, Pop, I've got you." And I would look up at that young woman being so gentle with me, and I would think, thank God this family stepped up. I had no idea. 4 feet away from the person who was doing it to me, and I was thanking her. I want you to sit with that for a second because it is the whole trap. When you get old, the world hands your children a story about you before anything even happens. The story is that you are slipping, and once that story is in the air, every real thing that goes wrong just proves it. You forget where you set your glasses, and it is the slipping. You get dizzy, and it is the slipping. Nobody looks for another reason because the story is already written, and the saddest part is that you start to believe it about yourself. I believed it. For about 6 weeks, I truly believed my own mind was going. The thing that saved me was the same thing that had been quietly nagging at me the whole time. I could not make the numbers agree, and a man who has spent his life making numbers agree does not sleep well when they will not. It got worse before I got smart about it. I want to be fair here because I've gone back over these weeks 100 times, looking for the moment I should have known sooner. The second week of September, Danny suggested I see a new doctor. My own doctor, Ellen Barrow, has known me for 30 years. She delivered nothing and cured everything, as we used to say around here. But Danny said Dr. Barrow was old-fashioned, that there was a nice young physician over in the next county who was taking new patients and who was wonderful with, and here she paused and lowered her voice, wonderful with memory concerns. Kyle drove me. Danny came into the room with me and did most of the talking. She told that young doctor, who had never laid eyes on me before, that I had been getting confused, wandering, forgetting my grandchildren's names, which was a lie. I have never once forgotten June's name, but I sat there in the paper gown feeling foggy because I had eaten Danny's breakfast casserole that very morning, and I did not correct her. And the young doctor wrote it all down. Possible early cognitive decline. He said we should monitor it. He said it kindly. He had no way of knowing he was being handed a script and asked to sign it. I understand now what that visit was. It was not medicine. It was the beginning of a paper trail. They needed a doctor who had never known me sharp, so that when they said I was going dull, there would be nobody to say otherwise. Then came the thing with the cedar box. And that is when the grief and the anger got all tangled up together, and I could not tell them apart anymore. Vivian kept her good pieces in a cedar box on top of the dresser. Not much, by the world's reckoning. Her wedding band, worn thin, a little enamel charm bracelet I bought her for our 30th, one charm for every big thing we ever did together, a tiny piano, a tiny house, 2 tiny babies for the grandkids. It was worth almost nothing to a pawn shop, and it was worth everything to me. I opened that box one morning in October to hold the bracelet, the way I did some mornings when the missing her got to be too much, and the bracelet was gone, and the wedding band was gone. I stood there in the cold bedroom with that empty cedar box in my 2 hands, and I felt the floor go out from under me, and it was not the dizziness this time, because a foggy old man loses his glasses. A foggy old man does not have his dead wife's wedding ring lifted out of a locked box in a back bedroom. Somebody had been in that box, somebody with a key and a reason, and I was starting to run very short on people it could have been. That was the night I stopped lying to myself. I sat myself down with the daybook at that kitchen table and did the one thing I know how to do better than almost anybody. I made a record. I wrote down every dollar that had gone missing with the date. I wrote down every dizzy spell and every foggy morning with the date. And then I did something that turned out to be the smartest thing I did in this whole sorry business. Next to each bad day, I wrote down what I had eaten and who had brought it. It took me 3 more days of writing before I saw it. But once I saw it, I could not unsee it. The bad mornings, the dizzy ones, the foggy ones, always came after a supper Danny brought. Chicken and rice, her beef stew, the breakfast casserole she would leave covered on the stove. And on the 2 or 3 days that week when I had waved her off and eaten my own eggs and toast, my head had been clear as a bell. Clear as it is right now, telling you this. Now, most men would have jumped straight to the worst thought. I did not, and I will tell you why, because it matters. 41 years behind that counter taught me that a symptom is a reading, not a verdict. You do not diagnose a man off one number. You take the reading, you write it down, and you go looking for what could make it read that way. Dizziness, drowsiness, confusion in an older man. I had counseled families on those exact 3 things 1,000 times, and I knew, the way you know your own phone number, the short list of ordinary things that cause all 3 at once. Too much blood pressure medicine, that was one. And the other was the kind of thing you can buy right off a drugstore shelf. An ordinary over-the-counter sleep aid, the kind with an antihistamine in it that fogs an old brain like a windshield in January. I sat with that. I am not ashamed to tell you I wept a little, alone at that table, because to even think it was to accuse my own boy's wife of something monstrous, and part of me was still praying I was a paranoid old fool. But the numbers would not let me be a fool. The numbers said the fog came in a bottle, and the bottle came with supper. So I made myself a rule. I would not accuse. I would not confront. I had spent a career watching people ruin a true thing by shouting it before they could prove it. If I was right, then the moment I opened my mouth, the food would get clean, the pills would go back to normal, and I would be exactly what they were already telling everyone I was, a confused old man making wild accusations about the sweet girl who cooks his meals. Number. If I was going to catch what was happening in my own kitchen, I was going to have to prove it the way you prove anything that has to hold up. Carefully, quietly, on paper, and better than paper. The next morning, Danny came by with a thermos of soup and that soft, patient look, and she watched me not remember whether I had taken my pills. And I nodded and said, maybe it was time we talked to somebody, and I meant it. I just had a very different somebody in mind than she did. Before I get to what I found, let me say one quick thing, and then I will not interrupt this story again. If you have ever had somebody decide without asking you that your best thinking was behind you, that you were done, that you needed managing more than you needed listening to, then I am talking to you tonight, and I would take it kindly if you would subscribe and sit with me the rest of the way. Because what my own doctor found in my blood is the thing I most need you to hear. I called Ellen Barrow's office myself from the phone in my bedroom with the door shut, and I did something I had not done in a year. I made an appointment and I told nobody. I drove myself, which took some doing because I had to pick a clear morning, and clear mornings only came when I could quietly skip whatever Danny had left on the stove. I told her I felt fine, poured the soup down the sink, ate my own eggs, and drove into town with my hands steady on the wheel. Ellen took one look at me across her desk and she knew something was up, because I had my daybook with me and I set it down between us like a piece of evidence, which is exactly what it was. I laid it all out for her. The money, the 2 doctors, the empty cedar box, the dizzy days and the clear days, and the column where I had written down every meal. I watched her face the whole time. Ellen Barrow is not an excitable woman, but when I got to the part about the food, she got very still, and she reached over and turned my daybook toward her and read that last column all the way down, and when she looked up, her eyes had changed. She said, "Nolan, I want to run a full panel today, blood, and I want to include a toxicology screen." She said it careful, and even the way I used to talk to a customer I did not want to frighten. But then she said the thing that told me she already believed me. She said, "And I want you to eat nothing that comes from that house until we have the results. Nothing. Do you understand me?" 3 days later, she called me at home, and thank God I was alone when the phone rang. She did not soften it because I had asked her not to. She said the screen came back with 2 things in it that had no business being in my blood. There was a level of a blood pressure medicine far higher than the small dose I actually take, high enough to drop my pressure and set the whole room spinning every time I stood up. and there was a good amount of a sedating antihistamine, the over-the-counter kind, the kind that fogs the mind and steals the short-term memory of a man my age and looks, to anybody who does not check, exactly like the beginning of the end. Confusion, Ellen said to me on that phone, is not a character flaw. In your case, Nolan, it is a dose. There is nothing wrong with your mind. Somebody has been poisoning you slowly enough to make it look like age. I sat down on the edge of my bed. I had known it was coming. I had done the arithmetic myself at that kitchen table. And still, hearing another human being say it out loud, hearing a doctor I trusted say the word poisoning about my own supper, it took the wind clean out of me. For a minute, I could not speak. 14 months a widower, and I had let the loneliness make me easy, and the two people I had trusted most in the world had looked at my grief and seen an opportunity. But here's the part they never counted on. Here's the part I have to tell you slow, because if you take one useful thing from an old druggist tonight, I want it to be this one. Years back, the week I retired and handed the store keys to the young fellow who bought me out, I did something that my kids all thought was a little bit funny at the time. I went to see Ellen Barrow, and I asked her to run a full workup on me and to write down, in my chart, exactly how my mind worked while it was still working fine. A memory test, word lists, the whole business. She asked me why on earth I wanted that, a healthy man of 68. And I told her the truest thing I know. I told her you cannot ever call a reading abnormal if you never wrote down the normal one first. Every scale in my store, first thing every morning, I set it to 0. You 0 it while your hand is steady. Because after that, no matter who leans on the counter, that scale tells the truth, and nobody can hand you a wrong weight and make it stick. That was my baseline. A record 5 years old filed away in a doctor's office that said in plain black ink that Nolan Prewitt's mind was sharp. And it meant that no matter how confused they made me look this fall, there was a document sitting in a drawer that they did not know existed, and it would not agree with a single word of their story. They tried to rob a sharp man. What they did not understand is that a sharp man leaves himself a note. Now, I still did not understand the why of it. The money in the tin was small change. Vivian's bracelet would not have paid a month's rent. You do not poison a man for $40 a week. There had to be a bigger prize somewhere, and it took me a couple more clear mornings to see where they were pointing all this. Then it clicked. And when it clicked, I felt cold all the way through. They were not trying to steal from me. They were trying to be put in charge of me. There is a world of difference, and the difference is the whole game. You see, I am not a rich man, but I am not a poor one either. The house has been paid off since Reagan. And when I retired, I took a good part of my savings and I bought what they call a deferred annuity, a steady thing, a monthly check for the rest of my days with a balance set aside for the children after. It is the kind of nest egg that a person cannot just walk into a bank and grab, not while I am of sound mind and signing my own name. But there is one way to get at a thing like that, one clean, legal, terrible way. You go to court, and you convince a judge that the old man is not of sound mind anymore. You get yourself named his conservator. And once the court hands you that piece of paper, you are not stealing his money. You are managing it for his own good. That was the plan. The fog was not the crime. The fog was the evidence they were manufacturing to win the crime in a courtroom. Every dizzy spell they gave me, every confused morning, every note in that young doctor's file, it was all being stacked up to walk into a Kentucky district court and file a petition to have me declared a disabled person so that Danny and Kyle could take the wheel of everything I own. And I had almost helped them do it because I had almost believed it myself. I did not go to the sheriff. Not yet. I want to be honest about why, because I know some of you are yelling it at your screen right now. A confused old man walks into the sheriff's office saying his sweet daughter-in-law is poisoning his soup to steal his money in court. Do you know what that looks like from the other side of the desk? It looks like exactly the story they were already telling. It looks like paranoia. It looks like the slipping. I had a blood test and a daybook, and I needed more than that. I needed it airtight. So I did what I should have done the day the tin first came up short. I got myself a real lawyer. Her name is Frances Doyle. Fran. She does elder law over in the county seat, and I had heard her name for years because she is the one the churches send the widows to. I sat in her office and I laid the whole thing out a second time. The book, the blood, the baseline, and Fran listened without one flicker of doubt on her face, and when I finished, she took off her glasses and said, "Mr. Prewitt, I have to tell you, most people bring me this after the money is already gone. You are early. Do you understand how rare it is that you are early?" And then Fran told me how to do it right, and this is the part I most want the good people watching to hear, because there is a wrong way to fight this that feels satisfying and gets your case thrown in the trash. She said, "Do not play detective. Do not go through their phones. Do not set a trap that a defense lawyer can call entrapment. We are going to build this so clean that it stands up in daylight. She had me do 3 things. First, I could put a small camera in my own kitchen, in my own home, because a man is allowed to record his own common rooms in Kentucky, and she told me exactly where the law drew the line so I would not cross it. Second, the next few dishes that came from that house, I did not eat and I did not throw out. I sealed them, and Fran had them picked up by a courier and sent to an accredited laboratory with a chain of custody, every hand that touched them signed and dated, so that no one could ever say the sample was tampered with. And third, the hardest one. Fran picked up her phone right there in front of me and reported it to Adult Protective Services, the state office that exists for exactly this, the older adult being harmed by the people trusted to help. A caseworker named Sonia Reyes opened a file that afternoon, so now there was a record that was not just mine. A doctor, a lab, a lawyer, a state caseworker, my old baseline in one drawer and a fresh toxicology screen in another, and a little camera up on my kitchen shelf, quietly telling the truth to no one but itself. And then Fran looked at me and asked the question that turned this from a defense into something else. She said, "Mr. Prewitt, they do not know that you know. That is the one advantage you will ever have, and you only get to spend it once. How do you want to spend it?" I thought about Vivian's empty cedar box. I thought about that soft, patient hand on my shoulder, and I thought about 41 years of never once handing a customer the wrong bottle. I said, "Fran, I do not want to just stop them. I have watched people like this move on to the next lonely old soul the minute the door closes. I want it on the record. All of it. I want the exact moment it happens to be something a jury can watch with their own eyes. And I think I know how to make them show me." The hardest part of that whole stretch had nothing to do with Danny, or the courtroom, or the poison. The hardest part was June. She called me every Sunday evening like clockwork, the way her grandmother used to call her own mother. And that first Sunday after I knew, I sat on the edge of my bed, the phone warm against my ear, and I could hardly get a word out because I wanted so badly to tell her. I wanted to say, "Honey, your brother and his wife are doing a terrible thing to me. Come home." But I did not. And I want to tell you why, because it was the hardest call I ever made, and I think some of you have made one like it. If I told June, she would have been in her car inside the hour, driving 90 miles an hour down through the dark, furious, and crying, and she would have marched into that house and blown the whole thing sky high before Fran ever had a single sealed jar or a minute of film. Love does that. Love wants to kick the door in. But love kicking the door in was exactly what would have let them get away clean, because a warned thief cleans up the kitchen. So I lied to my granddaughter. I sat there and I told her I was doing just fine. A little tired maybe, missing her grandmother, and I listened to her tell me about her third graders and the boy who ate the paste, and I laughed in the right places, and when she said, "Pop, you sound a little off, are you sure you are okay?" I said, "I am okay, sugar. I am going to be okay." Which was the first true thing I had said in 10 minutes. Protecting somebody sometimes means carrying a thing alone that you would give anything to set down. I carried it 4 more weeks. If you have ever done that for somebody you love, you know it does not feel noble while you are doing it. It just feels lonely. For the next 2 weeks, I became the best actor in the state of Kentucky. It went against everything in me. Every morning I let them believe the fog was winning. I would eat a bite or two of whatever came from that house, only a bite, enough to be able to say I had, and I would tip the rest into a sealed jar in the pantry for Fran's courier. I let my sentences trail off. I called Kyle by his father's name once, on purpose, and watched Danny's eyes light up when I did it. I asked the same question twice in an afternoon. I let them find me standing in the yard in my slippers looking at nothing. And when Danny came out and took my elbow and said, "Pop, what are you doing out here?" I let my chin tremble and I said, "I am not sure, sweetheart. I am just not sure." I hated every minute of it. But I had spent 41 years reading people across a counter, watching a man tell me he only needed the cough syrup for his wife, and I knew that the surest way to make a liar comfortable is to become the thing they already decided you are. So I became it. I let them win so that they would get bold, because bold people stop being careful, and careless people end up on camera. There is a diner on the square in Millbrook called the Dixie Grill, and I have eaten breakfast there most every Sunday after church for close to 50 years. Same booth by the window, same waitress, near enough, though the good ones retire on you. Vivian and I used to go together and split an order of biscuits and gravy because the plate was too big for either of us alone, and after she passed, I kept going, and I kept ordering the 1 plate and 2 forks because I could not make myself say the word "one" to that waitress. Kyle knew that about me. He grew up in that booth. So one of those Sundays in the thick of it, I asked Kyle to take me to breakfast, just the 2 of us, and I watched him the whole time. I want you to understand, I was not being sentimental. I was taking a reading. And what I saw at that table has stayed with me longer than almost anything else in this story. My grandson could not eat. He pushed those eggs around the plate and he could not meet my eyes. And when the waitress called me Mr. Prewitt and asked after my health, real concern in her voice because the word gets around a small town, Kyle flinched like she had slapped him. There was a boy at that table who was sick with what he was doing, and there was a woman at home who was not sick with it at all. And even then, even hurting the way I was, I filed that difference away, because it turned out to matter a great deal later when it came time to decide who I could still love. He drove me home and he walked me to the door with his hand under my elbow like I was made of glass, and at the door he stopped, and for 1 second I thought he was going to tell me. I saw it come up in his throat, and then Danny's car pulled in the drive, and whatever it was went back down. He said, "You get some rest, Pop," and he left. That was the closest Kyle came to saving himself before the end. 1 second, on a Sunday, at a screen door. I have forgiven him for a lot. I am still working on forgiving him for letting that second pass. And they got bold fast. Fran had a friend at the courthouse keep an eye on the filings, and one Thursday she called me, and her voice was flat and serious. She said, "Nolan, they did it. Kyle and Danny had gone to the county attorney and filed a petition to have me declared partially disabled and to have themselves appointed conservators of my estate. It was real. It had a case number. In Kentucky, a thing like that goes before a district judge, and either side can ask for a jury, 6 people from right here in the county who would sit in a box and decide whether Nolan Prewitt still had the sense God gave him. They had filed the papers to take my life apart in a courtroom using symptoms they were spooning into me themselves. The petition was the tell. Because a petition like that needs a mountain of proof that the old man cannot manage his own affairs, and there is one piece of proof worth more than all the doctors in the world. They needed me to sign things, confused, in front of witnesses. They needed to stand me in front of a notary looking lost and have me hand over a power of attorney of my own free and foggy will so they could waive it in court and say, "Look, he does not even understand what he is signing." And sure enough, that Sunday after church, Danny sat me down at my own kitchen table with that soft voice and said, "Pop, we have been talking, and we think it would just make everything easier if you let Kyle handle the money side of things officially. Take the worry off you. We have got a real nice lady, a notary, and a doctor friend who can come by the house next Saturday so you do not even have to go anywhere, just to sign a few papers. Won't that be a relief?" I looked at that young woman who had been poisoning me for 2 months, and I made my hand shake a little, and I said, "That sounds real good, honey. I am so tired of worrying about all of it." And inside, my heart was as steady as it has ever been, because she had just done the one thing I needed her to do. She had built the stage. She had picked the day, the place, the witnesses, and the reason. She was going to fill my kitchen with people, and she thought every one of them was coming to bury me. I called Fran that night. I said, "Saturday, my house. She is bringing a notary and a doctor to witness me sign myself away." Fran was quiet a second, and then she said, "All right." Then Saturday, so are we. Saturday came bright and cold, one of those October mornings where the whole county smells like wood smoke and wet leaves. I got up before dawn, the way I have every day of my life, and I made the coffee, and I stood at that kitchen window and zeroed Vivian's little brass scale, the balance she used to weigh her flour, the one that has sat on my windowsill since the day she died. I set it to true, out of habit, the way I have leveled a scale 10,000 mornings. And I said to her out loud in the empty kitchen, I said, "All right, Viv, let us weigh them honest." They came at 10. Kyle in his good shirt, not meeting my eyes. Danny all warmth and business, steering a nervous young notary and a doctor I had never seen toward my kitchen table, which she had already cleared and wiped down like it was her own. There were papers in a folder. There was a pen laid out. There was a glass of sweet tea set at my place that I had no intention of touching. Danny settled me into my chair at the top of the table, patted the back of my hand, and told the doctor in that gentle voice that I had my good days and my bad ones, and that today might be a little foggy, so we should all be patient with Pop. And I let her run it, right up until the notary opened the folder and slid the first page toward me and held out the pen. I looked at that pen for a long moment. Then I did not take it. Instead, I looked up, clear-eyed, at the young doctor she had brought, and I said in a voice with no fog in it at all, "Doctor, before I sign anything, I think you ought to know what is in the food this woman has been bringing me. And I think you ought to know it before you put your name on a paper that says I am the one who is confused." The kitchen went dead quiet. And that is when the knock came at the front door. I got up and answered it myself, walking steady across my own floor, and I felt every eye in that kitchen follow me. On my porch stood Fran Doyle with her briefcase, and beside her Ellen Barrow, and beside her a woman in a state cardigan holding a folder, Sonia Reyes from Adult Protective Services. And down at the bottom of the steps, in no hurry at all, A sheriff's deputy named Colgan stood with his thumbs in his belt, looking at the frost on my yard like a man who had all morning. I brought them in. I have thought 100 times since about the look on Danny's face when those four people walked into her carefully arranged little courtroom, and the closest I can get to it is a card player who has just watched somebody lay down a hand she was dead, certain nobody was holding. Fran did the talking, because that is what you pay a lawyer for. She set her briefcase on my kitchen table, right on top of their folder, and she introduced herself, and then she said, in the pleasantest voice, "We are so glad we caught everyone together. This will save us all a great deal of time." She turned to the young doctor first, the one Danny had brought, because Fran is smart, and she knew he was the only honest person on the other side of that table. She said, "Doctor, you were asked here to witness this man sign a power of attorney on the grounds that he is cognitively impaired. Before you do, you should see these." And she laid it out, page by page, the way I used to line up a prescription against a chart. She laid down my baseline from 5 years ago, signed by Ellen, a healthy man of 68 with a mind like a bear trap. She laid down the toxicology screen from 3 weeks back, a blood pressure medicine at triple what I take, and a sedative I have never once been prescribed. She laid down the independent lab report on Danny's own chicken and rice, chain of custody signed and sealed, the same 2 compounds sitting right there in the food. And then Fran said, "And we have one more thing," and she opened her laptop. I had not told anyone but Fran what the camera caught. I did not know myself until she showed me 2 nights before, and I will be honest with you, I had to leave the room the first time. The footage played on that little screen in my quiet kitchen. There was Danny at my stove, alone, thinking she was alone, taking a small folded paper from her purse and tapping a fine powder into the pot of soup and stirring it in, calm as stirring sugar into tea. There was Danny at the cedar box in my back bedroom lifting Vivian's wedding band into her palm. There was Kyle, in the doorway on another day, watching her salt my supper and turning away and saying nothing. Nobody in that kitchen moved. The only sound was a little tinny voice from the laptop and the coffee still ticking in the pot. And then Danny did the thing that people like her always do at the very end. The thing I have come to understand is the truest thing about them. She did not look at me. She did not look at the ruin of it. She turned on Kyle. She said, low and fast, "Tell them it was you. Tell them you handled the pills, Kyle. You know you did. Tell them." She was already sorting the wreck into piles, and she was putting my grandson at the bottom of it. And Kyle Prewitt, the boy I coached, the boy I raised from 9 years old, my dead son's son, put his face in his hands at my kitchen table and started to cry like he was 9 again. And through it, he said the only thing that mattered to me in that whole terrible morning. He said, "Pop, I swear before God I did not know about the food. I knew about the money. I knew we were. He could not finish it. I let her tell me you were slipping. I wanted to believe it because we owed so much and I could not see another way, and I told myself we were helping. But I did not know she was making you sick. Pop, I did not know." I believed him. You can call me a soft old fool for it, and maybe I am, but I have known that boy his whole life, and I have watched a lot of men lie to me across the counter, and that was not a lie. That was a soul waking up in the middle of the worst thing it ever did. Deputy Colgan did not shout. Nobody got thrown against a wall. That is not how this ended, and it is not how the good ones end. He simply stepped inside, and he read Danny her rights in a calm, tired voice, and Sonia Reyes stepped between her and Kyle so there would be no more of that. And Fran quietly told the young notary and the young doctor that they were both free to go, and that they had very nearly put their names to a crime, and I watched the color drain out of both of them as they understood how close they had come. No fists, no shouting, just paper, and a blood test, and 5 seconds of film laid on a kitchen table in the cold morning light. That is what justice looked like in my house. It looked like a scale, finally reading true. The weeks after were not a movie. Real life never wraps up as clean as we would like it to, and I would be lying to you if I pretended otherwise. The county attorney took the case, and it was a serious one. Danny was charged with knowing exploitation of an adult, which is a felony in Kentucky, and with theft and, because of what a lab found in my soup, with assault for the poisoning. The petition to have me declared disabled did not just fail. Fran walked into that district court with my baseline and my toxicology screen, and the judge did not need a jury of 6 to see what had happened. He dismissed their petition, he set aside every scrap of authority they had tried to gather over me, and he made a note in the record that I was of entirely sound mind, which, let me tell you, is a strange and wonderful thing to hear a judge say about you out loud. I want to stop on that hearing a moment, because it is the part I did not expect to feel the way I felt it. In Kentucky, when somebody files to have you declared a disabled person and put under a conservator, the law says you have the right to be there. You have the right to your own lawyer, and if you cannot get one, the court hands you one, And you have the right to make them prove it in front of a jury of 6 of your neighbors if you want to. Danny and Kyle had counted on me never using a single one of those rights because a foggy man does not fight. And there I sat, in a clean shirt, sharp as a tack, next to my own lawyer, at a hearing they had started, watching it turn into the exact opposite of what they built it for. I did not gloat, and I mean that. I had thought I would want to all those weeks I was pouring soup down the drain. I thought when the day came I would feel some hot rush of getting even. But when it came, and I watched that young woman realize there was a 5-year-old piece of paper that said my mind was fine, and a blood test that said she had put it there, and a chain of custody report on her own cooking, I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired, and I felt sad, and mostly I felt grateful, in a bone-deep way, that I had listened to a stubborn old notebook instead of the sweet voice telling me I was through. Being believed, it turns out, is the thing, not winning. Being believed. Vivian's wedding band and her little charm bracelet turned up in a pawn shop 2 counties over, and Deputy Colgan drove them back to me himself in a small paper envelope, and I have never in my life been so glad to hold 2 worthless little pieces of gold. As for Kyle, I asked the county attorney to put Kyle's cooperation on the record, and I meant it. He told them everything, every date, every amount, and he told the truth about what he knew and what he did not, even the parts that made him look like a coward, which took more spine than the cowardice ever did. He is going to answer for the money he took. He should. But I asked the court to see the difference between the one who built the poison into a plan and the one who looked away because he was drowning and ashamed. There is a difference. It does not make him innocent. It makes him a man who took a wrong turn in the dark and can still, God willing, find his way back to the road. I have not closed that door on him. I do not intend to. A man who raised a boy does not get to stop being his grandfather just because the boy broke his heart. June came home the day after. She drove down from Lexington in the rain, and she walked into my kitchen and she did not say a word. She just put her arms around my neck the way she used to at 6 years old when the world had scared her, and we stood there in the kitchen a long time. Then she made us both a cup of coffee, and we sat at that same table, and it felt like a table again instead of a courtroom. I want to leave you with something useful, because I did not tell you all this just to hand you a sad story about my family. I told it because it is happening in kitchens all over this country right now, quiet as a powder stirred into soup, and most of the folks it happens to never get the chance to be early the way I did. So hear an old druggist out. If you love somebody who is getting on in years, do not ever let one single person stand between them and their food, their pills, their mail, their money, and their doctor all at once. That is not care. That is a wall, and walls have a way of hiding things. If somebody's mind seems to be slipping all of a sudden, do not just accept the story. Sudden confusion in an older person is very often a medicine or a poison, not a fate, and a simple blood test can tell the difference. Ask the doctor. See the doctor alone, with nobody in the room to answer for you. And if you are the older one, the one this could happen to, then do the thing I did back when I was healthy and everybody thought it was funny. Go get your baseline while your hand is steady. Get your affairs in real order with a real lawyer, an elder law attorney, before you ever need one. Tell one person you trust completely where everything is, and write things down. Keep your own record in your own hand, because the day may come when your quiet little book of true numbers is the only voice in the room that nobody thought to silence. A scale will lie to you all day long if you never zero it, but you set the true weight first while you still can, and after that, no one on this earth can hand you a wrong number and make it stick. I gave Vivian's brass scale to June before she drove back north. I wrapped it in a dish towel and set it in her hands, and I told her, "Zero it every morning, honey, first thing before you trust a single reading." She thought I meant the flour. Maybe someday she will know I meant more than that. I still get up before the sun, I still make the coffee, and I still stand at that window a minute in the quiet where the little scale used to sit, and I think about how close a lonely man can come to being talked out of his own mind, and how the thing that saved me was not being clever. It was being honest with a notebook, 40 years before I ever needed to be. Go check on the quiet ones, friends. The widower at the end of your street who waves from the porch. Ask him how he is really doing and stay long enough to hear the answer. It costs you an hour, and it just might be the hour that somebody counts on. Good night from Millbrook, Kentucky. Zero your scale in the morning, and be somebody's honest number.